You can't just evict people, Karen. This document proves my clients have a right to be here.
My clients own this land, Michael. Your paperwork means nothing. That cabin is coming down.
They tried to seize my family's lake cabin with a fake court order. What they didn't know? My dad's a federal judge, my sister's an FBI agent, and I'm a U.S. attorney. Karen picked the wrong family to mess with. Tell me where you're watching from. And has anything like this happened in your city or state? Let me back up and explain how we got here, because this story is absolutely wild. My name's Michael Harrison, and I'm a U.S. attorney for the Northern District. Not exactly the kind of guy you'd expect to get steamrolled by some power-hungry HOA president, right? Well, Karen Whitfield had other plans. The cabin sits on Crystal Lake, about 2 hours north of the city. My grandfather built it in 1952 with his own hands. Every log, every beam, every stone in that fireplace. When he passed, it went to my dad, federal judge Robert Harrison. When Dad decided he was too old for the upkeep, he gifted it to me 3 years ago. All legal, all documented, all above board. It's not much to look at from the outside. Rustic cedar logs, green metal roof, a dock that's seen better days. But inside, pure magic. Stone fireplace, knotty pine walls covered in 3 generations of family photos, and windows that frame the lake like living paintings. My 8-year-old daughter Emma calls it the best place in the whole world, and honestly, she's not wrong. The cabin sits in what used to be an unincorporated area. No HOA, no covenants, just peaceful lake living. That changed 2 years ago when some developer bought up half the shoreline and created the Crystal Lake Estates Homeowners Association. Suddenly, my grandfather's hand-built cabin was supposedly subject to their rules. I ignored their first few letters, politely declined their invitation to join. Figured they'd get the hint that a cabin predating their HOA by 70 years wasn't exactly under their jurisdiction. That was my first mistake. It started on a Friday in October. Emma and I had driven up for a weekend of fishing and esmores. The leaves were turning, the lake was glass smooth, and life was good. We'd just finished unloading our gear when I noticed the woman marching down my driveway. Karen Whitfield looked exactly like Central Casting would order for Suburban Tyrant. Perfectly styled blonde hair, designer athleisure wear, and the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. She carried a clipboard like a weapon and walked with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in her entire privileged life. "Excuse me," she called out, not bothering with introductions. "Are you the owner of this structure?" Structure. Not cabin, not home, not the place where 3 generations of my family had made memories. Structure. "I am," I said, keeping my voice level. Emma was watching from the porch, and I didn't want her to see her dad lose his temper. "Can I help you?" Karen consulted her clipboard with theatrical precision. "I'm Karen Whitfield, president of the Crystal Lake Estates HOA. This property is in violation of multiple covenants and architectural standards." "Actually, it's not," I replied. "This cabin was built in 1952, long before your HOA existed. It's grandfathered in under state law." Her smile turned predatory. "I'm afraid you're mistaken. All properties within our boundaries are subject to our authority. I'm here to serve you with a notice of violation." She handed me an official-looking document. At first glance, it seemed legitimate. Letterhead, case numbers, the works. But I've been reading legal documents for 15 years, and something felt off. The violations were absurd. Unapproved exterior materials. The cedar logs my grandfather had carefully selected and installed. Non-compliant dock structure. The same dock that had been there since Eisenhower was president. Unauthorized landscaping. The wildflowers my grandmother had planted in the 1960s. But here's what really caught my attention. The document claimed I had 30 days to bring the property into compliance or face immediate legal action, including potential seizure and sale of the property to recover HOA liens and fees. Seizure and sale. For wildflowers and cedar logs. "This is ridiculous," I said, handing the paper back. "You have no authority over this property." Karen's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "Oh, Mr. Harrison, I think you'll find we have more authority than you realize. 30 days. I'd suggest you start making arrangements." She turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with a bogus violation notice and a very bad feeling in my gut. Emma came down from the porch. "Dad, what did that mean lady want?" "Nothing important, sweetheart," I said, folding the paper and shoving it in my pocket. "How about we get that fishing rod set up?" But as we walked toward the dock, I was already thinking like a prosecutor. The document was too polished, too official-looking to be some amateur power play. Someone with legal knowledge had crafted it. The question was, how far were they willing to go? I was about to find out. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button if you want to see how this ends. Trust me, Karen's about to learn why you don't mess with a family that basically is the justice system. So there I was, staring at this bogus violation notice while Emma cast her line into the lake. The whole thing felt wrong, but I figured I'd handle it Monday morning with a few phone calls. Maybe send a cease and desist letter. Standard legal stuff. That was my second mistake. That Sunday night, back in the city, I did what any prosecutor would do. I started digging. The Crystal Lake Estates HOA had been incorporated exactly 24 months ago. The registered agent? A law firm I'd never heard of called Whitfield and Associates. Whitfield, as in Karen Whitfield. Interesting. I pulled up the property records for the area around my cabin. Karen's husband, David Whitfield, had purchased 12 lots over the past 3 years through various LLCs. All distressed sales, all well below market value. The pattern was becoming clear. My phone rang. Dad's number. "Michael, I just got the strangest call," Judge Harrison said without preamble. Someone claiming to be from the county assessor's office, asking about the ownership history of the cabin. Said there were questions about the deed transfer. What kind of questions? Whether the transfer to you was legitimate. Whether there might be outstanding liens or claims. I told them to contact you directly, but... Dad paused. "Son, in 40 years on the bench, I've learned to recognize fishing expeditions. Someone's building a case." That's when it clicked. This wasn't just about HOA power trips or architectural compliance. This was about the land itself. My 2-acre lakefront plot, conservatively worth $800,000, sitting right in the middle of whatever development Karen's husband was planning. "Dad, I need you to do something for me," I said. "Call Sarah." Sarah Harrison Martinez, my older sister, had been with the FBI for 12 years. Currently assigned to the white-collar crime unit. If Karen was running some kind of real estate scam, Sarah would know how to prove it. Tuesday morning, I was in court when my phone started buzzing. Text after text from my neighbor at the lake, Mrs. Chun, who lived in the cabin across the cove. Men at your cabin with official trucks. Say they're county inspectors. Taking lots of photos. Should I call police? I stepped out during recess and called her back. "Mrs. Chun, how many men?" "3. 2 trucks. One says County Building Department. Other says Environmental Services. They have clipboards, cameras, measuring equipment. Look very official. Did they show you any identification?" I asked, but they said they only had to show property owner. Very rude. One is taking pictures of your dock, saying something about environmental violations. Environmental violations. Now they were bringing state agencies into their fake paper trail. I called the actual county building department. No inspections scheduled for my property. No complaints on file. No record of any inspection requests. Then I called the state environmental office. Same thing. No inspections, no violations, no records. Someone was impersonating government officials. That's a federal crime. Time to call on the cavalry. That evening, I sat in Dad's study with him and Sarah. 3 generations of law enforcement experience, and we were all looking at the evidence I compiled. "It's definitely a scam," Sarah said, flipping through the fake inspection reports that had somehow been slipped under my cabin door. "But it's sophisticated. Professional letterhead, convincing case numbers, proper legal formatting. Someone with inside knowledge is running this." Dad examined the original HOA violation notice through his reading glasses. The legal language is too precise for a suburban housewife with delusions of grandeur. This was written by someone who understands property law. Karen's husband is a real estate attorney, I said. Small firm, but he's been practicing for 20 years. Sarah nodded. Classic land grab scheme. Create fake violations, pile on fake fees and liens, then use fabricated legal authority to force a sale. The property gets auctioned off to the highest bidder, who happens to be connected to the people running the scam. How do we prove it? I asked. Sarah smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile she got when she was about to destroy someone's entire criminal enterprise. We let them keep digging their own grave. But first, we need to document everything. And I mean everything. The next morning, Sarah drove up to the lake with a van full of surveillance equipment. Not the obvious kind. The FBI has toys that would make a spy movie jealous. Tiny cameras, audio recorders, GPS trackers. All perfectly legal when installed on my own property. If they're going to keep sending fake inspectors, she said, adjusting a camera hidden in the eaves of the cabin, we're going to record every word they say. Dad, meanwhile, was working his contacts in the state attorney general's office. If David Whitfield was using his law license to perpetrate fraud, the State Bar Association would be very interested. And me? I was doing what prosecutors do best, building an airtight case, one piece of evidence at a time. Friday afternoon, right on schedule, they came back. This time it was 4 men in 2 trucks, county building department and state environmental enforcement. Sarah and I watched from her surveillance van, parked a quarter-mile away with a clear view of the cabin. Audio is crystal clear, she whispered, adjusting her headphones. Video is perfect. These idiots have no idea they're being recorded. The fake inspectors spent 2 hours at the cabin, photographing everything, measuring the dock, taking water samples from the lake. All very official looking, all completely fraudulent. But here's what they didn't know. While they were busy creating fake evidence, Sarah was creating real evidence. Every word they spoke, every fake measurement they took, every fraudulent document they filled out was being recorded in high definition. The best part? One of them actually called Karen on speakerphone to report their findings. Yeah, we got everything you need, the lead fake inspector said. Dock's definitely non-compliant with state waterway regulations. Foundation has settling issues. Septic system's an environmental hazard. This place is a lawsuit waiting to happen. Karen's voice came through clear as a bell. Perfect. That gives us grounds for immediate condemnation. David says we can fast-track the seizure if it's a public safety issue. Sarah looked at me and grinned. Got him. Monday morning, I found another official-looking document taped to my cabin door. This one was even more elaborate than the first. Multiple pages, official seals, the works. It declared my property condemned for public safety violations and ordered me to vacate within 72 hours. 72 hours. They weren't even pretending to follow due process anymore. The document was signed by someone claiming to be a county judge I'd never heard of. The case number referenced a court that didn't exist. The whole thing was so fraudulent, it was almost insulting. But attached to the back was something that made my blood run cold. A purchase agreement. Karen's husband, through one of his LLCs, was offering to buy my condemned property for $50,000, about 6% of its actual value. How generous of them to help me out of my legal troubles. That's when I knew we had them dead to rights. This wasn't just harassment or fake violations anymore. This was attempted theft through fraudulent legal process. In federal court, that carries a potential 20-year sentence. Time to spring the trap. First, Karen's been running an elaborate real estate scam using fake HOA violations and phony government inspectors. But now she's about to find out why you don't mess with a family that includes a federal prosecutor, an FBI agent, and a federal judge. Smash that like button because this is where things get really interesting. So there I was, holding this ridiculous condemnation notice that looked like it was printed at Kinko's when my phone rang. It was Mrs. Chun again, and she sounded panicked. Michael, there are police cars at your cabin. Real ones this time. My heart stopped. How many cars, Mrs. Chun? 2 sheriff's department vehicles. For officers. And that woman, the HOA lady, she's with them. She has a big folder of papers, and she's pointing at your cabin, talking very loudly. This was it. Karen had escalated to the next level of her scam, fake law enforcement. But she'd just made the biggest mistake of her criminal career. I was 45 minutes away, but Sarah was already in position. She'd been camping out in her surveillance fence since dawn, expecting exactly this scenario. "I can see them from here," she said over the phone. 2 patrol cars, county sheriff markings. For men in uniform. "But Michael, something's off about those uniforms." "What do you mean?" "The badges are wrong. County sheriff's deputies have 7-point stars. These guys are wearing 6-point badges. And their patches, the font's wrong, colors are slightly off. These aren't real deputies." Of course they weren't. Karen had hired actors to play law enforcement officers. In the state where my cabin sits, impersonating a police officer is a felony. In federal court, when it's part of a conspiracy to commit fraud, it's a 20-year sentence. "Sarah, are you recording this?" "Every second. High-definition video, crystal clear audio. These idiots are about to confess to multiple federal crimes on camera." From Sarah's surveillance footage, which would later become Exhibit A in federal court, here's exactly what happened. Karen marched up to my cabin door like she owned the place, flanked by 4 men in fake sheriff's uniforms. She was carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than most people's rent. By order of the Crystal Lake County Court, she announced loudly enough for Mrs. Chun to hear from across the cove. "This property has been condemned for public safety violations. The owner has 72 hours to vacate or face arrest for trespassing." One of the fake deputies, a guy who looked like he'd been hired from a community theater, stepped forward with what appeared to be an official document. "Ma'am," Mrs. Chin called out from her dock, "are you sure you have the right property? This cabin belongs to the Harrison family. They've owned it for 30 years. Karen's mask slipped for just a second. The Harrison family failed to comply with legally mandated safety inspections. The property is now under county jurisdiction pending sale to recover outstanding fines and fees." "How much are the fines?" Mrs. Chun asked innocently. $750,000, Karen replied without missing a beat. Sarah had to put her hand over her mouth to keep from laughing out loud. $750,000 in fines for a 2-bedroom cabin. Even the fake deputies looked uncomfortable with that number. What Karen didn't know was that while she was playing dress-up with her hired actors, real law enforcement was already mobilizing. Dad had called in a favor with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and Sarah had alerted her FBI field office about the ongoing fraud investigation. At exactly 2:47 p.m., while Karen was directing her fake deputies to secure the premises, 3 black SUVs pulled into the cabin's driveway. The transformation was instant. Karen went from smug confidence to deer-in-headlights panic in about 2 seconds. 8 real federal agents stepped out of those vehicles. Not actors, not hired security guards. Actual FBI agents with actual badges, actual guns, and actual arrest warrants. Karen Whitfield, Special Agent Rodriguez, stepped forward. "I'm with the FBI. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, mail fraud, and impersonation of federal officials." The fake deputies immediately started backing away, hands up, trying to distance themselves from Karen. Smart move, but too late. "David Whitfield, you're also under arrest." They'd grabbed Karen's husband as he was leaving his law office downtown. Apparently, he'd been coordinating the whole operation from there. Here's where it gets really good. Karen, faced with 8 federal agents and surveillance footage of her entire operation, decided to try one last desperate bluff. "This is harassment," she screamed. "I'm a legitimate HOA president enforcing legally valid property regulations. Check my paperwork." Agent Rodriguez actually smiled. "We did check your paperwork, Mrs. Whitfield. All of it. The Crystal Lake Estates HOA that doesn't exist. The county court orders signed by judges who don't exist. The inspection reports from agencies that never sent anyone to this property. I don't know what you're talking about." "Really?" "Because we have you on tape coordinating fake inspections. We have financial records showing your husband purchased 12 properties using the exact same scam. We have the actors you hired to impersonate sheriff's deputies. That's when one of the fake deputies threw Karen completely under the bus. "Look, we were just hired to wear costumes and read lines," he blurted out. "She paid us $300 each to dress up like cops. We didn't know it was illegal." Karen's face went white. "Shut up, you idiot." Too late. Agent Rodriguez was already reading them their rights. Once they had Karen and David in custody, the whole scheme fell apart like a house of cards. The FBI had been building their case for weeks, and they had everything. Bank records showing David's LLCs had acquired 12 lakefront properties using fraudulent liens and fake legal proceedings. Email communications between Karen and David planning the cabin seizure. Financial records showing they'd hired actors, printed fake documents, and even rented vehicles with fake government markings. Testimony from victims of their previous scams. Turns out my cabin wasn't their first target. The scope of their operation was staggering. Over 3 years, they'd stolen nearly $6 million worth of lakefront property using variations of the same scam. Create fake HOA violations, pile on fabricated fees, use fraudulent legal authority to force sales, then swoop in with lowball offers through shell companies. The worst part? They'd already succeeded with 8 other families. Elderly couples who didn't understand their legal rights. Young families who couldn't afford to fight fake legal proceedings. People who trusted that official-looking documents were actually official. Mrs. Patterson, an 82-year-old widow, had lost her family's century-old fishing cabin to a $400,000 environmental remediation lien that was completely fabricated. The Johnsons, a young couple with 2 kids, had been forced to sell their weekend retreat for $30,000 to cover structural violation fees that never existed. All of these properties had ended up in David's portfolio, then been resold to developers for massive profits. Even facing federal charges, Karen couldn't help herself. As they were loading her into the FBI vehicle, she spotted me arriving at the cabin. "This isn't over," she screamed across the parking area. "You think your daddy being a judge makes you untouchable? I know people too. I'll have your law license. I'll have your cabin. Agent Rodriguez gently but firmly guided her into the back seat and closed the door, cutting off her rant mid-sentence. Sarah walked over to me, grinning from ear to ear. "Well, that was therapeutic. Is it really over? For Karen and David? Oh yeah. We've got them on multiple federal charges with overwhelming evidence. They're looking at 20 years minimum, probably more once we finish investigating all their victims." And the cabin? The cabin was never in any real legal jeopardy. All their paperwork was fraudulent, which means all their claims were void from the beginning. You'll need to file some paperwork to clear up the fake liens, but that's just administrative cleanup. As the FBI vehicles drove away with Karen and David in custody, Mrs. Chun came over from her cabin with a bottle of champagne. "I've been saving this for a special occasion," she said with a huge smile. "I think watching those criminals get arrested definitely qualifies." But even as we were celebrating, I knew this was just the beginning. Karen and David were facing federal charges, but there were still 8 families who'd lost their properties to this scam. 8 families who deserved justice. And there was still the question of what happened to all that stolen money. The morning after Karen's arrest, I got a call from Sarah at 6 a.m. "Michael, you need to get down to the federal courthouse. Now." "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's going right. The FBI raided David's law office last night, and what they found. Jesus, Michael, this thing is massive. Your cabin was just one tiny piece of a multi-state criminal enterprise." I threw on clothes and drove straight downtown. The federal building was buzzing with activity. Agents wheeling out boxes of evidence, news vans setting up outside, and my dad's car in the prosecutor's parking garage. Sarah met me at security and walked me up to the FBI's evidence processing floor. I'd never seen anything like it. Dozens of boxes, each labeled with case numbers, property addresses, and victim names. Computer hard drives stacked like pizza boxes. Bankers' boxes full of fake documents. David Whitfield wasn't just running a real estate scam, Agent Rodriguez explained as he showed me through the evidence room. He was operating a full-service fraud factory. Fake HOAs, fake government agencies, fake court orders, fake everything. He pulled out a manila folder marked Crystal Lake Estates, HOA, complete package. Look at this. Professional letterhead, fake board of directors, fabricated meeting minutes going back 5 years. They even created a fake website with stock photos of happy homeowners. David's law firm was charging other scammers $50,000 for complete HOA takeover packages. My jaw dropped. You mean they were selling this scam to other criminals? Exactly. We've identified at least 37 different fake HOAs across 12 states, all using David's template, each one targeting lakefront, mountain, or other high-value recreational properties. He showed me another box labeled Government Impersonation Kit. Fake EPA badges, fake county inspector IDs, fake court seals. They had everything you'd need to convince someone that the government was coming after their property. But the real bombshell was in the financial evidence. Agent Martinez, the FBI's white-collar crime specialist, walked me through the money trail on a whiteboard that looked like something from a conspiracy theory documentary. David's operation generated approximately $47 million in fraudulent property transfers over 4 years, she explained, pointing to a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts. 47 million? I couldn't believe it. Here's how it worked. Karen would identify target properties, always recreational properties owned by people who didn't live there full-time. David's team would create fake legal problems, HOA violations, environmental liens, structural condemnation, tax issues. They'd pile on fake fees and fines until the amount owed exceeded the property's value. She pointed to another section of the whiteboard. Then they'd offer to help by purchasing the property for just enough to cover the fake debts. The victims thought they were getting rescued from financial ruin. In reality, they were being robbed. How many victims total? So far, 237 families across 12 states. And we're still counting. While the FBI was building their case, Karen was sitting in federal detention, and she had what she thought was a brilliant plan. She was going to flip on David, cut a deal with prosecutors, and walk away with minimal jail time. What she didn't know was that the prosecutor assigned to her case was my dad. Sarah called me around noon, laughing so hard she could barely speak. "Michael, you have to get down to the courthouse. Karen just requested a plea negotiation meeting, and she has no idea who she's about to sit across from." I made it to the courthouse just as Karen's public defender was walking her into the conference room. Through the glass door, I could see my dad sitting at the table in his best prosecutorial poker face, surrounded by stacks of evidence. Karen walked in wearing an orange jumpsuit, looking confident despite her circumstances. She'd clearly spent the morning preparing her. I was just following my husband's orders, defense. What happened next was recorded, standard procedure for plea negotiations, and I later got to watch the footage. It's the most satisfying thing I've ever seen. Karen sat down across from my dad and immediately launched into her prepared speech. "Mr. Prosecutor, I want to cooperate fully with your investigation. My husband David manipulated me into participating in activities I didn't fully understand. I was essentially a victim of his schemes." Dad nodded politely. "I see. And what exactly did you think you were doing when you hired actors to impersonate sheriff's deputies?" Well, David told me they were real deputies. I thought we were conducting legitimate legal proceedings. Legitimate legal proceedings to seize property worth $800,000 for fabricated HOA violations? Karen's confidence started to waver. The HOA violations were real. I had documentation. Documentation you created yourself using Microsoft Word templates. "I don't know what you mean." Dad opened one of the evidence folders and pulled out a stack of papers. "Mrs. Whitfield, we have your computer hard drives. We have the metadata showing when these documents were created, what software was used, and what printer they came from. We have your browser history showing you researching how to create official-looking letterhead and legal document templates." Karen's face went white. "We also have recordings of your phone calls with your husband coordinating the entire operation. Would you like me to play a few excerpts?" Dad pulled out a small digital recorder and pressed play. Karen's voice filled the room, crystal clear. "David, the Harrison cabin is perfect. Elderly neighbors, absentee owners, property worth at least $800,000. I can have fake violations written up by Thursday. Make sure the fines are high enough to justify seizure." Last time you were too conservative with the Patterson property. I've got the actor lined up for the EPA inspector. Same guy we used in Michigan. He's very convincing. Karen was staring at the recorder like it was a poisonous snake. Mrs. Whitfield, Dad continued calmly. You're facing charges of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, impersonation of federal officials, and racketeering. The federal sentencing guidelines suggest 25 to 30 years in prison. 25 to 30 years. However, if you're willing to cooperate fully, and I mean fully, we might be able to discuss a reduced sentence. Karen practically leaped across the table. Yes, absolutely. I'll tell you everything. David has accounts in the Cayman Islands, properties in Florida under fake names. He's been planning to flee the country. Excellent. Let's start with a complete list of all properties your organization has fraudulently acquired. For the next 3 hours, Karen spilled everything. Every property, every victim, every fake document, every shell company. She drew diagrams of their organizational structure. She provided passwords to encrypted files. She even gave them the contact information for other criminal organizations they'd sold their HOA takeover packages to. My dad later told me it was the most comprehensive criminal confession he'd seen in 20 years of prosecution. But the best part came at the very end of the meeting. Mrs. Whitfield, I have one final question, Dad said as he was closing his files. The Harrison cabin that started this investigation. Do you know who Michael Harrison is? Karen looked confused. Some lawyer who got lucky and caught us. What? Dad smiled for the first time during the entire meeting. Michael Harrison is my son. The color drained from Karen's face so fast I thought she was going to faint. You are your son? My son. The federal judge who signed your arrest warrant? That's my father-in-law. The FBI agent who's been investigating you for weeks? That's my daughter-in-law. Karen just stared at him, mouth hanging open. Mrs. Whitfield, when you decided to target that cabin, you didn't just pick the wrong property. You picked the wrong family. Despite her complete confession, Karen's plea deal wasn't as generous as she'd hoped. 25 years became 15 years, with the possibility of parole after 12 if she continued cooperating with ongoing investigations. David, who refused to cooperate and tried to claim the whole thing was Karen's idea, got the full 30-year sentence. But the real justice was still coming. The FBI had identified 237 victim families, and every single one of them was going to get their property back. Agent Rodriguez called a press conference the next day to announce the largest property fraud recovery operation in FBI history. Working with federal prosecutors and cooperating witnesses, he announced to a room full of reporters, "We have identified and frozen approximately $47 million in fraudulently obtained assets. Every victim of this conspiracy will have their property restored or receive full compensation." Mrs. Patterson, the 82-year-old widow who'd lost her family's fishing cabin, was in the front row crying tears of joy. "I thought I'd never see that cabin again," she told reporters afterward. "My husband built that place with his own hands 50 years ago. These people stole my memories, my history. Getting it back? It's like getting my husband back." But even as we were celebrating the victims getting justice, the investigation was revealing an even bigger problem. David and Karen weren't operating in isolation. They were part of a nationwide network of property fraud specialists. "This is just the beginning," Agent Martinez told me privately. "We're tracking similar operations in 15 states. David's HOA takeover package was being used by criminal organizations from Florida to Washington state. How big is this thing? We estimate that fake HOA scams have stolen over $200 million in property nationwide in the past 5 years. Your family catching Karen might have just broken open the biggest property fraud conspiracy in American history." 3 days after her plea deal was finalized, Karen made one last desperate attempt to reduce her sentence. She claimed she had information about high-level government corruption related to the property scams. What she didn't realize was that her bombshell revelation was actually about a county commissioner who'd been taking bribes to approve fraudulent property seizures, and that commissioner was already under FBI investigation. Her cooperation attempt backfired spectacularly when it became clear she was trying to trade information the FBI already had for a better deal. The judge was not amused. Karen's sentence went back up to 20 years. 2 weeks after Karen's sentencing, Agent Rodriguez called me with news that made my blood run cold. "Michael, we need to talk. In person. Can you get down to the field office this afternoon?" "What's wrong?" "We've been analyzing Karen's computer files and phone records going back 2 years. This wasn't random, Michael. She'd been researching your family for over 18 months. When I arrived at the FBI office, Agent Martinez had Karen's digital life spread across 3 monitors like a serial killer's investigation board. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the first screen. "Karen's browser history from March 2022, 14 months before she approached you about the cabin." The search terms made my skin crawl. Michael Harrison, lawyer, Chicago, background check. Harrison family property, records, Lake County. Federal prosecutor James Harrison, cases 1. Judge Patricia Harrison Chin, court decisions. Sarah Harrison, FBI agent career. "She knew," I whispered. "She knew exactly who we were." "It gets worse," Agent Rodriguez said, pulling up the second monitor. "We found a folder on her laptop labeled Harrison Family Research. Look at this." The folder contained hundreds of files. Photos of our cabin taken from the lake with a telephoto lens. Screenshots of my law firm's website. Copies of my dad's court filings from major cases. Articles about Sarah's FBI commendations. Even my college graduation photo from LinkedIn. But the most disturbing file was a detailed family tree going back 3 generations, with notes about everyone's careers, addresses, and potential vulnerabilities. "Why?" I asked. "Why target us specifically if she knew we were all in law enforcement?" Agent Martinez opened a third folder labeled Revenge Research. "Because of this," she said, pulling up a 20-year-old court document. United States versus Whitfield Construction Company. Federal prosecutor, James Harrison. Verdict, guilty on all counts. My dad had prosecuted David's father's construction company for federal contract fraud in 2003. David Whitfield Sr. got 8 years in prison, and the family lost everything. David Jr. was 17 when his father went to prison, Agent Rodriguez explained. According to Karen's notes, he blamed your father for destroying the Whitfield family legacy. This whole thing was revenge. I felt sick. So they spent 20 years planning this. Not exactly. David learned law, probably to understand how your father had beaten his father's case. But the revenge angle didn't become active until 2019, when David's father died in prison. Agent Martinez showed me Karen's journal entries, recovered from her laptop. March 15, 2022. David finally ready to move against the Harrison family. James Harrison destroyed their lives 20 years ago. Time to return the favor. The cabin is perfect, isolated, valuable, and they'll never see it coming. June 8, 2022. Researched all the Harrisons. Michael is the weak link, just a civil lawyer, probably doesn't know much about criminal law. If we can steal his precious family cabin, it'll destroy them emotionally and financially. September 12, 2022. David says we need to be careful. The whole family works in federal law. But that's what makes this so perfect. They'll be so shocked and humiliated when we outmaneuver them with their own system. While I was processing the fact that my family had been targeted for a decades-old grudge, the FBI was using Karen's information to dismantle the entire nationwide fraud network. Operation Lake House, as they'd codenamed it, launched simultaneous raids in 15 states on a Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. Agent Rodriguez called me at 7:30 a.m., barely containing his excitement. "Michael, you need to turn on the news. Right now." I flipped on CNN just as they were breaking into regular programming. This is CNN breaking news. Federal agents are conducting coordinated raids across 15 states this morning, targeting what the FBI calls the largest property fraud conspiracy in U.S. history. We're getting reports of arrests in Florida, Texas, Colorado, Washington state. The footage was incredible. FBI agents in tactical gear raiding luxury offices in Miami, mountain cabins in Colorado, beachfront properties in California. News helicopters following convoys of federal vehicles loaded with evidence boxes. By noon, the numbers were staggering. 47 arrests, $200 million in fraudulent property seizures identified, over 800 victim families. But the biggest arrest happened in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where FBI agents found the man behind the entire operation, Marcus Webb, a disgraced former real estate developer who'd been running the fraud network like a franchise operation. Webb was selling complete crime packages, Agent Martinez explained when I got to the office that afternoon. For $100,000, he'd provide everything a criminal organization needed to start stealing properties. Fake legal templates, contact lists for corrupt officials, training manuals, even customer service support. Customer service for criminals? 24/7 help desk. Having trouble with your fake EPA inspector? Call our support line. It was like McDonald's for property fraud. Webb's operation was so sophisticated they had regional managers, quarterly performance reviews, and annual conventions where different fraud teams would share best practices. David and Karen were actually middle management, Agent Rodriguez said. They ran the Great Lakes region and were responsible for recruiting and training other teams. The most damning evidence came from Webb's annual real estate recovery conferences, criminal conventions disguised as legitimate business seminars. The FBI had recovered video recordings from the 2023 conference, held at a resort in Nevada. I got to watch Karen giving a presentation titled Maximizing Emotional Leverage in Target Acquisition. The key to a successful property acquisition, Karen said to an audience of 50 criminals, is making the target feel completely helpless. You want them to believe that fighting back will only make things worse. She clicked to her next slide. Case study. The Harrison family cabin. We identified the Harrison property as a high-value target with excellent emotional leverage potential. The property has been in the family for 3 generations, so the emotional attachment is maximum. The owners are all federal law enforcement, so they'll be especially humiliated when they can't use their own system to fight back. The audience laughed and applauded. The beauty of targeting law enforcement families is that they think they know how the system works. They'll waste time trying to file proper paperwork and follow correct procedures while we're stealing their property out from under them. More applause. By the time they realize they're dealing with fake authorities, we'll have clear title and be selling to our cash buyers network. Watching this video made me angrier than anything else in the entire ordeal. Karen hadn't just tried to steal our cabin. She'd turned our family into a training exercise for other criminals. But the investigation was about to reveal something even more shocking. Webb's organization wasn't just nationwide, it was international. We found communication with similar fraud networks in Canada, Mexico, and the UK, Agent Martinez told me. They were sharing victim lists, selling techniques across borders, even coordinating to avoid targeting the same types of properties. How big is this thing? We estimate the international network has stolen over $2 billion in property worldwide over the past decade. The Canadian connection was particularly disturbing. Webb's network had been selling American property fraud packages to criminals in Ontario who were using identical techniques to steal lakefront cottages from Canadian families. 3 days after the nationwide raids, Karen made a collect call from federal prison to a number she thought was her sister's. Due to a paperwork error, the call was actually routed to Agent Rodriguez's desk phone. The conversation was automatically recorded, all prison calls are, and Agent Rodriguez played it for me the next day. Karen, Lisa, thank God you answered. Have you seen the news? Agent Rodriguez, thinking quickly, I've been avoiding it. Too depressing. Karen, they got everyone. Lisa, Webb, the regional managers, everyone. The whole network is finished. Rodriguez, what does that mean for you? Karen, I'm screwed. 20 years, and now they're talking about adding international conspiracy charges. I could die in here. Rodriguez, how did this happen? Karen, that damn Harrison family. If we'd just picked any other cabin, none of this would have happened. David was obsessed with getting revenge on the prosecutor who destroyed his father, and look where it got us. Rodriguez, maybe you should have thought of that before you decided to steal someone's home. Karen, suspicious Lisa? You sound weird. Are you okay? Agent Rodriguez. This is Special Agent Rodriguez, FBI. Thank you for that additional confession, Mrs. Whitfield. We'll be adding it to your case file. The line went dead. The most emotional part of the whole experience came 2 weeks later, when the FBI organized a victim reunion at a hotel in Chicago. Over 200 families who'd had their properties stolen came together to meet the agents who'd recovered their homes and each other. Mrs. Patterson, the 82-year-old widow whose fishing cabin had been stolen, grabbed my hands with tears in her eyes. Young man, if you hadn't fought back, if you hadn't had the family you have, none of us would have gotten our homes back. My granddaughter is getting married at that cabin next summer, just like I always dreamed. An elderly man named Frank Martinez approached me with his adult daughter. They stole my father's ranch in New Mexico using the exact same fake HOA scam, his daughter explained. We thought it was gone forever. My father built that place with his own hands after he came back from Vietnam. Frank, who had to be in his 70s, looked me straight in the eye and said, "Son, you didn't just save your cabin. You saved all of our homes. You saved our memories." By this point, the story had attracted national media attention. Netflix had reached out about documentary rights. 60 Minutes wanted to do a feature. But the most interesting call came from a true crime podcaster named Jessica Chun, no relation to my aunt, the judge. "Michael, I've been following this story from the beginning, and I think there's still more to uncover. Karen and David's revenge plot against your family. I don't think that's the whole story." "What do you mean?" "I've been researching the original case your father prosecuted against David's father. There are some inconsistencies in the timeline that don't make sense." She was right. Something about Karen's obsession with our family felt deeper than just revenge for a 20-year-old prosecution. Jessica's research revealed something the FBI had missed. David Whitfield Sr.'s construction company hadn't just been convicted of federal contract fraud. They'd been building federal housing projects. Housing projects that included a development specifically for federal law enforcement families. Housing projects where corners had been cut so severely that 3 buildings had collapsed, injuring dozens of FBI agents and federal prosecutors and their families. "Michael," Jessica said when she called me with this information, "your father didn't just prosecute David's father for fraud. David's father's shoddy construction put your entire family in danger. If you'd been living in one of those federal housing developments." The revenge wasn't just about a prosecution. It was about David blaming my father for exposing construction defects that could have killed federal law enforcement families, including mine. But there was one more piece to the puzzle, and it would only come to light later. Karen had been keeping a secret from David, the FBI, and everyone else. A secret that would explain why she'd been so confident they could steal our cabin and get away with it. A secret that involved someone inside the federal law enforcement system. Someone who'd been helping them all along. Welcome to the epic finale of the craziest property theft story ever told. Your theories in the comments have been insane. Some of you actually guessed what's coming. If you've been following this journey from the beginning, you know we just discovered Karen had an inside source in federal law enforcement. Well, buckle up because the identity of that source will blow your mind. Smash that like button and let's finish this story. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday. Agent Rodriguez's voice was tight, with barely controlled fury. "Michael, we found her. We found Karen's inside source. You need to get down here now." "At 3 a.m.? Trust me, you'll want to see this in person. And Michael, bring your father. He's going to want to hear this too." When Dad and I arrived at the FBI field office, the conference room looked like a war zone. Agent Martinez was pacing like a caged tiger. Agent Rodriguez was staring at his computer screen with disgust, and there were evidence boxes stacked everywhere. "Gentlemen," Agent Martinez said without preamble, "meet the person who's been feeding information to Karen's fraud network for the past 3 years." She turned her laptop around, and I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. On the screen was a federal employee ID photo of someone I recognized immediately, Deputy Marshal Jennifer Walsh, a 15-year veteran of the U.S. Marshal Service who worked in the Asset Recovery Division, the same division responsible for recovering stolen federal property. The same division that would have been notified if our federal land dispute had been real. Jennifer Walsh has been Karen's source inside federal law enforcement since 2021, Agent Rodriguez said. She's been providing real federal case numbers, authentic government letterhead templates, and advance warning whenever legitimate federal investigations got close to the fraud network. Dad was staring at the photo with recognition dawning on his face. I know her. Jenny Walsh. She testified in 3 of my cases over the years. Always professional, always prepared. I recommended her for a commendation in 2019. That's what makes this so sick, Agent Martinez said. Walsh specifically requested assignment to cases involving your prosecutions, James. She's been studying your work for years, learning your patterns, your methods. Agent Rodriguez opened another laptop showing Walsh's seized files. The depth of her betrayal was staggering. Walsh didn't just provide templates and case numbers, he explained. She was conducting active surveillance on federal law enforcement families, identifying potential targets for the fraud network. The files contained detailed dossiers on dozens of FBI agents, federal prosecutors, and federal judges. Photos of their homes, vacation schedules, family information, financial records. She had a file on every member of your family, Agent Martinez said, opening a folder labeled Harrison Priority Target. Inside were photos of our cabin taken from a U.S. Marshal Service boat during what was supposed to be a routine patrol. Copies of Dad's case files that should have been classified. Sarah's FBI personnel records. Even my law school transcripts. Walsh was feeding this information to Karen for over 2 years, Agent Rodriguez said. Every time your family went to the cabin, Walsh knew. Every time your father was assigned a new case, Walsh knew. Every time Sarah got a new assignment, Walsh knew. But the most damning evidence was a series of encrypted messages between Walsh and Karen, recovered from Walsh's personal phone. Walsh, March 2022, Harrison family confirmed for Memorial Day weekend at cabin. Father will be in trial all week, won't be available to help. This is your window. Karen, perfect. David's ready to move. You're sure about the federal land angle? Walsh, I've used it successfully in Colorado and Oregon. Federal families never question federal authority. They trust the system too much. Karen, what if they call to verify? Walsh, I'll intercept any verification calls through the Marshal Service switchboard. I can keep them confused for weeks while you establish title. Karen, you're worth every penny we're paying you. Walsh, just remember our deal. When this network goes nationwide, I want 10% of everything. She wasn't just helping them steal properties, I said, feeling sick. She was planning to become a partner. It gets worse, Agent Martinez said. Walsh was already recruiting other federal employees. We found evidence she was building her own network inside federal law enforcement. The FBI's plan to catch Walsh was elegantly simple. Agent Rodriguez called her, pretending to be following up on a routine asset recovery case involving our cabin. Deputy Marshal Walsh. This is Agent Rodriguez, FBI. I'm calling about a property dispute in Lake County involving the Harrison family. We received some conflicting paperwork and wanted to verify the federal land status. The call was recorded, and Walsh's response was immediate and confident. Oh yes, the Harrison cabin situation. That's been resolved. The property was correctly identified as federal land and has been transferred to appropriate management. No further FBI involvement necessary. Could you send me the case file number for our records? Absolutely. Case number FLS 2023-4471. I'll email you the documentation. Within an hour, Walsh had sent Agent Rodriguez a complete set of forged federal documents proving that our cabin was on federal land and had been legally transferred. She'd just provided evidence of her own crimes directly to the FBI. Walsh was arrested the next morning as she arrived at work. The arrest was captured on the federal building's security cameras, and Agent Martinez showed me the footage. Walsh looked genuinely shocked as FBI agents approached her in the lobby of the U.S. Marshal Service building. Jennifer Walsh, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, conspiracy to commit mail fraud, abuse of federal authority, and violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. "This is ridiculous," Walsh shouted as they cuffed her. "I'm a federal law enforcement officer. There's been some mistake." "The only mistake," Agent Rodriguez said as he read her rights, "was thinking you could steal from federal families and get away with it." Walsh's interrogation lasted 14 hours over 2 days. By the end, she'd confessed to everything and provided information that led to the arrest of 6 more federal employees in 4 different agencies. But the most shocking revelation came when Agent Martinez asked why she'd specifically targeted federal law enforcement families. "Because they're arrogant," Walsh said bitterly. "They think the system protects them. They think their badges and their connections make them untouchable. I wanted to prove that anyone can be a victim, including your fellow officers, especially my fellow officers. Do you know how many federal agents and prosecutors I've watched get promoted while I stayed stuck in asset recovery? Do you know how many times I've had to clean up their messes, recover property from cases they screwed up?" Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. "So this was about career jealousy? This was about justice. These people live in their perfect federal housing, send their kids to private schools on government salaries, vacation at their family cabins while the rest of us struggle. I was just redistributing the wealth. By stealing people's homes. By correcting an unfair system." Walsh's cooperation revealed that the property fraud network was even larger than the FBI had initially discovered. Her inside information had enabled the theft of over $500 million in property nationwide. But more disturbing was the discovery of what Walsh called the Federal Family Database, a comprehensive list of every federal law enforcement family in the country, complete with property records, financial information, and vulnerability assessments. Walsh wasn't just helping Karen steal properties, Agent Martinez explained. She was building a target list for a systematic campaign against federal law enforcement families nationwide. The database contained over 10,000 families, including Supreme Court justices, federal judges, FBI directors, and U.S. attorneys. Each entry included detailed information about family properties, security measures, and optimal times for acquisition attempts. But the biggest revelation came when Walsh revealed the international scope of the operation. The fraud network wasn't just selling stolen American properties to domestic buyers. They were selling them to foreign nationals as investment properties. We found evidence that over 200 stolen properties were sold to buyers in other countries, Agent Rodriguez told me. These weren't just random real estate investments. Foreign intelligence services were buying stolen properties from American federal law enforcement families. For what purpose? Surveillance, intimidation, intelligence gathering. If you own the cabin next to an FBI agent's family retreat, you can monitor their communications, their visitors, their patterns. The implications were staggering. Foreign governments had been using Karen's fraud network to establish surveillance positions near American federal law enforcement families. 3 weeks after Walsh's arrest, I got an unexpected call from the federal prison where Karen was being held. "Mr. Harrison? This is Warden Phillips at FCI Milan. Karen Whitfield is requesting a meeting with you. She says she has information about your family that you need to hear." "What kind of information?" "She wouldn't say, but she seems genuinely scared. She's requested protective custody and says she's willing to provide additional cooperation if you'll agree to meet with her." Against my better judgment, and with Agent Martinez accompanying me, I agreed to the meeting. Karen looked terrible. Prison had aged her 5 years and 2 months. Her perfectly styled hair was gone, replaced by a gray ponytail. Her expensive clothes had been replaced by an orange jumpsuit. But her eyes still held that calculating intelligence that had made her so dangerous. "Michael," she said as soon as I sat down, "I need you to know that everything I did to your family, it wasn't just about revenge for your father's prosecution of David's father." "Then what was it about?" "It was about preventing something much worse from happening to you." I stared at her. "What are you talking about?" Karen glanced at Agent Martinez, then back at me. "The international buyers I mentioned. The foreign nationals who were purchasing stolen properties from federal families? What about them? They weren't just buying properties for surveillance. They were buying them for elimination." My blood went cold. "Elimination? Michael, your family cabin wasn't just targeted for theft. It was targeted for a foreign intelligence operation designed to eliminate your entire family. Agent Martinez leaned forward. Explain. The buyers who were supposed to purchase your cabin after we stole it, they weren't real estate investors. They were another country's intelligence operatives. The plan was to buy the cabin, then invite your family up for a property dispute resolution meeting. And then make it look like a tragic accident. Carbon monoxide leak. Boating accident. Something that would eliminate an entire family of federal law enforcement officers without raising suspicion. The room was silent for a long moment. You're saying, I said slowly, that you stole our cabin to save our lives? I'm saying that when I realized what the real buyers intended to do with the property, I tried to back out of the deal. But by then, Walsh and the network had too much invested. They told me if I didn't complete the theft, they'd sell the information about your family directly to the foreign operatives. So you decided to steal our cabin to prevent them from buying it? I decided to steal your cabin and then disappear with it. Take it off the market entirely. It was the only way to protect you. Agent Martinez was taking notes furiously. Why didn't you contact the FBI with this information? Karen laughed bitterly. Contact the FBI? Walsh was the FBI's contact for this type of intelligence. She was the one coordinating with the foreign buyers. If I'd gone to the FBI, Walsh would have known immediately. Karen's revelation led to a deeper investigation of Walsh's activities, and what they found was even more disturbing than anyone had imagined. Walsh hadn't just been selling property information to criminals. She'd been selling federal law enforcement family information to foreign intelligence services for over 5 years. Walsh was essentially running a foreign intelligence operation from inside the U.S. Marshals Service, Agent Rodriguez explained. She was identifying federal families, facilitating property thefts, and then arranging for foreign operatives to acquire properties near other federal families. The investigation revealed that Walsh had facilitated the sale of over 50 properties to confirmed foreign intelligence operatives, creating a network of surveillance and potential operation sites near federal law enforcement families across the country. But the most shocking discovery came when a thorough search of our cabin revealed why it had been such a high-priority target. Hidden in the walls during the cabin's original construction in 1952 were communication cables that had been part of a Cold War-era federal communications network. Our innocent family cabin was actually sitting on top of a decommissioned but still functional federal communications hub. Your grandfather probably never knew, Agent Martinez explained. The federal government used private properties as cover for communication installations during the Cold War. When the installations were decommissioned, the properties were just left alone. So foreign intelligence services weren't just targeting our cabin for surveillance, I said. They were targeting it for the communications infrastructure. Exactly. If they gained control of your property, they would have had access to communication lines that still connect to active federal facilities. The final sentencing hearing was held on a crisp October morning. Karen received an additional only 10 years for her cooperation, bringing her total sentence to 30 years. Walsh received 45 years plus forfeiture of all assets, and branded the biggest Marshals Service traitor in century. But the most satisfying moment came when David Whitfield Jr. was sentenced. As the judge read his 35-year sentence, David finally spoke directly to my family. Your Honor, I want to apologize to the Harrison family. My father's crimes were his own. My desire for revenge destroyed my life and put innocent people in danger. I'm sorry. Dad stood up in the gallery. David, your father was guilty of the crimes I prosecuted him for. But you were just a kid then. I'm sorry that your desire for revenge led you down this path. It was a moment of grace that I hadn't expected from my father, and I think it gave David some peace as he was led away. 6 months after the final sentencing, our family returned to the cabin for the first time since the whole ordeal began. The FBI had installed new security systems and had the property thoroughly swept for any surveillance devices. The old communication cables had been properly decommissioned and removed. But more importantly, the cabin felt like ours again. Sarah brought her kids up for the weekend. Dad and Mom came up from Chicago. Aunt Patricia took a rare weekend off from the federal bench. We grilled burgers, went fishing, and told stories around the campfire just like we had for decades. You know, Sarah said as we sat on the dock watching the sunset. I keep thinking about what Karen said, about trying to protect us by stealing the cabin. Do you believe her? I asked. I think she convinced herself it was true. I think she wanted to believe she was the hero of her own story, even while she was committing crimes. Dad, who had been quiet most of the weekend, finally spoke up. The hardest part of this whole thing wasn't almost losing the cabin. It was realizing that my prosecution of David's father 20 years ago set all of this in motion. Dad, I said, David's father was guilty. You did your job. I know. But I keep thinking about 17-year-old David, watching his father go to prison, losing his family's business, and deciding that revenge was the answer. Maybe if I'd handled things differently. You can't take responsibility for other people's choices, Aunt Patricia said firmly. David chose revenge. Karen chose crime. Walsh chose betrayal. You chose justice. There's a difference. Netflix's documentary, The Lake House Conspiracy, premiered 8 months later. Watching our story told by professional filmmakers was surreal, but they did an excellent job of showing how a simple property dispute had uncovered an international conspiracy. The most powerful moment in the documentary came when they interviewed Mrs. Patterson, the 82-year-old widow whose fishing cabin had been stolen. People ask me if I'm angry about what happened, she said, sitting in her recovered cabin with her granddaughter. But I'm not angry. I'm grateful. If the Harrison family hadn't fought back, if they'd just accepted that their cabin was gone, none of us would have gotten our homes back. The documentary won 3 Emmy Awards and led to congressional hearings about security vulnerabilities in federal law enforcement. Dad's experience with the case inspired him to work with Congress on new legislation to protect federal law enforcement families from property fraud. The Federal Family Property Protection Act was signed into law a year after our ordeal ended. The law requires additional verification steps for any property transactions involving federal law enforcement families, creates a federal database to track property fraud attempts, and establishes severe penalties for anyone who targets federal families for property crimes. It won't prevent all property fraud, Dad explained when the law was signed, but it will make it much harder for criminals to target federal families specifically. So that's the end. Justice served, families restored, and one cabin standing strong as a symbol of survival. But let me leave you with a question. If Karen and Walsh had targeted your family, would you have fought it legally or gone harder, knowing what was at stake? Drop your answer in the comments. And remember, sometimes the only way to beat corruption is to drag it into the light.